This is our video on the correlation between teen birth rates and sexual health education in the United States by Ruby, Ava, and Jiaxing. We chose to study why certain states in America have such high teen birth rates and whether sexual health education has an impact on teen birth rates. Teen birth rates are the average number of births per 1,000 females between the ages of 15 and 19. The teen birth rate for America as a whole in 2021 was 13.9. However, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Arkansas each have teen birth rates approximately double the national average. Meanwhile, North Hampshire, Vermont, and Massachusetts have teen birth rates which are just over a third of the national average. In order to study the impact of education on the teen birth rate, we looked at the percentage of the state's population with a high school diploma or equivalent over the age 25, and whether sexual education is required to be taught in each state, and what percentage of secondary schools in each state teach students how to correctly use a condom. In order to study what percentage of schools teach sexual health education, we looked at how many schools in each state teach the 22 sexual health topics, which the CDC deems crucial for a young person's sexual health knowledge. In states where sexual education is mandatory, not all 22 health topics may be taught at every secondary school. However, because sexual education is mandatory in these states, it can be assumed that at least some of these health topics are being taught as part of the sex ed curriculum. We chose to look at the teaching of the correct use of condoms because they're the most accessible and affordable form of birth control in America, aside from abstinence. We chose to look at sexual health education in secondary schools as teen birth rates are measured per 1,000 females between the ages of 15 and 19, which, by that stage, females are generally in secondary school. Arkansas has the highest teen birth rate of any state in the U.S., at 26.5 births per thousand. 34% of the population aged over 25 has a high school diploma or equivalent, and the state legislature does not require sex education to be taught in schools. More so, only 38% of schools in Arkansas teach 19 or more of the 22 CDC-recommended sexual health courses. As the population pyramid demonstrates, Arkansas's birth rate has slowed over the recent years. The slowing birth rate, yet incredibly high teen birth rate, suggests that Arkansas's lack of sexual education in secondary schools is not contributing to slowing the teen birth rate. Mississippi has the second highest teen birth rate in the U.S. at 25.6 births per thousand. Similar to Arkansas, only 29.8% of the population above the age of 25 have a high school diploma or equivalent. Unlike Arkansas, Mississippi does require sexual education. However, the only sexual education that is allowed to be taught in schools is abstinence. Furthermore, Mississippi legislation requires that instruction and demonstration as to the use of condoms is not taught. Despite this legislation, however, it is reported that 41.6% of secondary schools in Mississippi do teach students how to correctly use a condom. Also, much like Arkansas, Mississippi has also seen a decline in the birth rate, as captured by the population pyramid, once more indicating that despite the slowing births across the state, teen births still greatly contribute to overall births in the state. Louisiana has a teen birth rate of 24.5. Louisiana has very similar education rates compared to Arkansas and Mississippi, with 32.8% of the population above the age of 25 holding a high school diploma or equivalent, and it has the lowest rates of sexual education taught in schools in America. It's not only is it not required that sexual education be taught, but only 16% of secondary schools in Louisiana teach students 19 or more of the 22 CDC recommended sexual health courses. Louisiana's birth rate is gradually decreasing. However, it's decreasing at a slower rate than Mississippi's birth rate. This suggests that the historical and current lack of sexual education, including the proper use of condoms, is causing Mississippi's fertility rate to decline more slowly due to unprotected sex, leading to more teen births. New Hampshire has the lowest teen birth rate of any state in the U.S. at just 5.4 births. Despite having such a low teen birth rate, New Hampshire's education rates are very similar to those of Louisiana, Arkansas, and Mississippi, as only 26.6% of the population above 25 have a high school diploma or equivalent. What differentiates New Hampshire from the three states previously discussed is that sexual education is mandatory in New Hampshire. 63.2% of secondary schools in New Hampshire teach all 22 of the CDC recommended courses for sexual health in secondary school. Furthermore, 96.4% of secondary schools in New Hampshire teach students how to correctly use a condom. New Hampshire has a far lower birth rate than previously mentioned states, and its birth rate has declined rapidly over the past few years. This not only reflects declining birth rates across America, but suggests the historical and contemporary teaching of sexual education and the proper use of condoms has empowered women and teen girls to have more control over their fertility. Massachusetts has the second lowest teen birth rate in the U.S. at 5.7. Massachusetts has education rates much like the previous states mentioned, with 22.8% of the population above 25 having a high school diploma or equivalent. Interestingly, Massachusetts legislation does not require sex education to be taught in schools. However, 59.9% of secondary schools in the state teach 20 of the 22 CDC recommended sexual health courses or more, and 75.3% of secondary schools teach students how to correctly use a condom. While the three states with the highest teen birth rates do not require sexual education to be taught in schools, only a minority of schools in those states teach any of the CDC recommended courses. Despite not being required to teach sexual education, the vast majority of schools in Massachusetts do teach it anyway, which may explain why it has such a low teen birth rate despite its legislation. More so, Massachusetts has the fourth lowest fertility rate in the U.S. at 49 births per thousand, and the state's already low fertility rate may contribute to its considerably low teen birth rate. Massachusetts has seen a decline in the birth rate, not as severe as New Hampshire's, but still more significant than the decline in both Mississippi and Arkansas's birth rate. Vermont has the third lowest teen birth rate in the U.S. at 6.4 births, and 26.2% of the population above 25 have a high school diploma or equivalent. However, sexual education is required by law in Vermont, and 52% of the secondary schools in Vermont teach all 22 of the CDC recommended courses for sexual health. 91.1% of secondary schools in Vermont teach students how to correctly use condoms. The required sexual education in Vermont and the widespread teaching of how to correctly use condoms explains Vermont's very low teen birth rate. Vermont has seen a rapid decline in the birth rate over the last few years. While we did not find a correlation between education statistics and teen birth rates, we did find a correlation between policy regarding sexual education in secondary schools and teen birth rates. The three states with the highest teen birth rates, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi, do not require sexual education to be taught in secondary schools, and on average, only 29.8% of schools across these three states teach the CDC recommended sexual health courses. Despite the general lack of sexual education across these three states, an average of 39.1 secondary schools teach students how to correctly use condoms. This implies that the exceptionally high teen birth rates across these states have encouraged schools to teach students how to use a condom. These states also have far greater fertility rates than the three states with the lowest teen birth rates, which suggests that teen birth rates in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Arkansas not only contribute greatly to the high fertility rates, but the historical lack of education regarding sexual health and birth control has led to greater birth rates overall. It should also be noted that these three states have total abortion bans, which definitely contribute to such high teen birth rates. Without access to safe abortions, teens have no choice but to carry pregnancies to term. Only two of the three states with the lowest teen birth rates require sexual education to be taught in secondary schools, Vermont and New Hampshire. Massachusetts does not require sexual education to be taught in secondary school. However, the majority of high schools in Massachusetts do teach the CDC recommended sexual courses anyway. And over 75% of secondary schools in the state teach students how to correctly use a condom. The high percentage of secondary schools in Massachusetts teaching sexual education, despite it not being required, contrasts greatly with Louisiana, Mississippi, and Arkansas, all of which also do not require sexual health to be taught in secondary school. And this difference may be caused by political and social differences. An example of the social and political difference between Massachusetts and the top three states is the law regarding abortion in Massachusetts. Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Vermont all allow for abortion. This suggests that Massachusetts' generally more progressive politics has led to more secondary schools teaching sexual education. Through our study, we found that teaching students the correct use of condoms contributes greatly to teen birth prevention. More so, we found that states where abortion is legal and sexual education is not required to be taught in school tend to have higher teen birth rates. As teens are not educated as to how to have safe sex, nor allowed to control their fertility, teen birth rates are much higher in these states. In the bottom three states, not only is abortion legal, but comprehensive sexual health education is much more common across secondary schools, allowing teens to not only understand birth control and use it effectively, but be in control of their own fertility. Our results have found that teen birth rates in the U.S. are dragged up by certain states which don't allow abortion or teach comprehensive sexual education in secondary schools.